The restaurant was busier than usual that evening. The lights above flickered dimly, casting shadows across the polished hardwood floors. The clatter of plates and the low murmur of conversations filled the air, but amid the noise, a single, quiet moment stood still. Leah, the young waitress, wiped her brow as she maneuvered through the crowded dining area. It had been a rough shift, one that felt longer than it should have. She had been running on fumes, barely able to keep up with the steady stream of orders. Tonight was especially chaotic, with a larger-than-usual group in the back corner of the room and a lingering reservation that kept pushing their time limits. But the worst part was the nagging feeling in her chest. The dread of being called out by Mr. Donovan, the owner. He'd been hard on her lately, watching her every move, criticizing her every slip-up, no matter how small. He was a perfectionist, and lately, Leah had been his primary target. She had heard the rumors, of course, how he could make or break people in this business. Leah wasn't naive enough to think she was immune. She had seen how quickly a person could go from serving at one of the busiest restaurants in town to standing at the unemployment office, begging for a job. Her stomach churned at the thought. She was just trying to make it through the night without a major incident. But it seemed like everything that could go wrong had already started. The kitchen had sent out the wrong orders more than once, and Leah had been forced to run back and forth, apologizing to the tables and trying to salvage the damage. She could feel her nerves beginning to unravel. Leah had been working at the Bellamy for almost a year now, and while she'd grown used to the rush, tonight felt different. The energy was thick with tension, and it didn't help that Mr. Donovan had been lingering in the dining room, watching her with his sharp eyes. Every time she passed by him, she could feel his gaze on her, his judgment as cold as the marble countertops in the kitchen. But it wasn't just him. There was also the woman sitting alone in the corner booth. Leah glanced over, hoping to avoid eye contact. The woman was elderly, her silver hair tied up in a neat bun. She wore a cream-colored shawl, a faint hint of age lines tracing the corners of her eyes. Leah had noticed her when she entered earlier in the evening. There was something about the woman that seemed off. She didn't belong here. It wasn't that she wasn't welcome. No, the woman had been polite enough. It was just the way she carried herself, like she knew something no one else did. The way her eyes scanned the room, as if she was studying everything with quiet precision. Leah didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman wasn't just an ordinary customer. Leah's thoughts were interrupted as she approached the table with the next round of orders. Leah blinked. She couldn't remember the last time a customer had said something so calmly. Usually, complaints were accompanied by an eye roll or a louder, more demanding tone. This woman, though, wasn't angry. She wasn't even upset. But there was a tension in her voice that Leah couldn't ignore. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Leah replied, stepping closer. "I'll get that fixed right away." The woman's eyes never left her. "Thank you, but I think I'll wait," she said simply. "I just wanted to point out that I don't prefer the dressing on the salad." Leah looked down at the plate and nodded. It was a small detail, something easily fixed. She glanced at the woman, studying her face for a moment. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a sudden sense of unease. The calmness in her demeanor didn't match the weight in her eyes. "I'll take care of it," Leah said, stepping back. But as she turned to walk away, something made her pause. The woman's hand had shifted slightly on the table, her knuckles pressing down on the edge with a deliberate firmness. Leah's stomach tightened. There was something about the gesture that seemed almost too intentional. For a moment, Leah hesitated, wondering if she should check with the kitchen, double-check the order. But the thought passed quickly. The woman had already assured her it wasn't a big deal, and besides, she didn't want to keep anyone waiting any longer. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to mess up again. She shook her head and moved towards the kitchen, trying to push the feeling away. But it lingered, hanging in the back of her mind like a shadow she couldn't quite escape. Inside the kitchen, Leah leaned against the counter, staring at the ticket in her hand. Her mind was elsewhere. She had to be careful tonight. Her boss's eyes were everywhere, and every move she made seemed to come under scrutiny. She could hear the clattering of pots and pans, the sharp commands of the chefs, and the low hum of conversation. But all of it felt distant, as if she were in a completely different world. Her hands moved mechanically as she adjusted the salad order for the elderly woman, replacing the dressing with a lighter vinaigrette. It was a simple fix, but Leah couldn't help but feel a sense of dread with each movement. She returned to the dining room, the plate in hand, her steps quick but unsure. As she approached the woman's table, she felt a strange shiver crawl up her spine. The woman was still sitting there, her eyes fixed on her, unmoving. There was something unnerving about the way she stared, like she was waiting for something, perhaps something Leah didn't even know was coming. The waitress stopped in her tracks, her fingers tightening around the plate. She knew she should speak, should offer some reassurance, but words caught in her throat. She set the plate down on the table and forced a smile. "Here you go, ma'am. I've made the change for you. Is everything all right now?" The elderly woman didn't respond immediately. She simply picked up her fork, her movements slow and deliberate. Then, with a quiet nod, she took a small bite of the salad. Leah stood there, watching her. Her heart raced in her chest, her palms clammy. The woman's gaze never wavered as she chewed, her eyes locked onto Leah's like an unspoken challenge. It was a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. But then, after a long, tense silence, the woman finally spoke. "You're a good girl," she said softly, her voice betraying nothing. "But I think you've made a mistake." Leah's stomach dropped. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Excuse me?" Leah stammered. "What do you mean?" The elderly woman set down her fork, her gaze still unblinking. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she asked quietly. Leah blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Should I?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't a kind one. It was a knowing smile, a smile that seemed to speak volumes of something Leah couldn't comprehend. "I think you should," the woman said. Leah turned to leave, but the words felt heavier than any of the plates she had carried that night. The woman had said nothing else, but her presence remained like a weight on Leah's shoulders. The room felt colder. And in that moment, Leah had no idea how much her world was about to change. Leah couldn't shake the feeling. It followed her through the rest of the night like an invisible shadow, trailing her with each step. The elderly woman's words, calm and cryptic, replayed in her mind over and over again. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Leah had done her best to dismiss it. She had tried to keep herself occupied with the rest of her tables, focusing on delivering food, refilling drinks, and making sure the customers were happy. But the words lingered, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. She couldn't remember ever seeing the woman before. But there was something unsettling about the way she had spoken, something that made Leah feel like she was on the cusp of understanding something she wasn't supposed to know. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin out. The frantic energy of the dinner rush slowly dissipated, and the restaurant grew quieter. Leah moved more methodically now, cleaning tables, wiping down counters, and finishing the last few tasks before she could finally clock out. But she couldn't bring herself to go home yet, not when that woman's words kept echoing in her head. Mr. Donovan, the owner, was still in the dining room, moving between the tables and checking on customers with his usual cool, authoritative demeanor. His piercing blue eyes scanned every inch of the room, as if looking for something, or perhaps someone, to criticize. Leah had never been able to figure him out. He was all business, no emotion, and always impeccably dressed, his black suit crisp and sharp. He ran the restaurant with an iron fist, and everyone who worked there knew better than to cross him. Leah had crossed him once before, and the consequences were still fresh in her memory. She had been late for a shift, just once, and he had made sure everyone in the kitchen knew about it. The look he gave her, cold and unfeeling, was a silent warning that she would not forget. Ever since then, Leah had kept her head down, followed the rules, and tried to stay out of his line of sight. But tonight, it wasn't Mr. Donovan she was worried about. It was the elderly woman in the corner booth. Leah had seen her leave the restaurant not long ago, disappearing out the door with a slow, deliberate gait. For some reason, that moment had been burned into her mind. There was nothing unusual about the woman's departure, nothing that should have made Leah pause, but something about the way she had left unsettled her. It was almost as if she knew something was coming, or perhaps that she had already seen it. Leah was just finishing her tasks when Mr. Donovan approached her from behind. She didn't hear him coming, but when she felt his presence, she stiffened immediately, like a soldier standing at attention. "Leah," his voice was sharp, commanding. She turned, forcing a smile, but she could already feel her palms starting to sweat. "Yes, Mr. Donovan?" "You did well tonight," he said, his voice cold but with a trace of approval. "But I've got my eyes on you. Don't get too comfortable." Leah nodded quickly, her throat tight. She didn't know if she could trust the compliment. Mr. Donovan rarely offered praise, and when he did, it was usually laced with a warning. She had learned over the past year to take everything he said with a grain of salt. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she replied, forcing herself to sound calm. His eyes narrowed, scanning her face for any hint of weakness. "You should be careful about the people you interact with here," he said cryptically, before turning to leave. Leah's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she couldn't quite understand. What did he mean by that? And why did it make her feel like something was about to go terribly wrong? She shook her head, trying to dispel the growing anxiety in her chest. Maybe she was overthinking things. It had been a long night, and her mind was playing tricks on her. Just as she was about to finish gathering her things and head out, the door to the restaurant opened with a soft jingle, and Leah's breath caught in her throat. It was the elderly woman. She walked in slowly, with the same deliberate pace as before. Her presence filled the space, even though no one else seemed to notice. She was no longer in the corner booth, but now standing near the entrance, looking around with the same intensity that had unsettled Leah earlier. Leah froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Her instinct told her to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen her. But something, perhaps a sense of curiosity, or maybe the unease that had been growing inside her all night, compelled her to approach. "Ma'am," Leah said, trying to sound polite. "Can I help you with something?" The elderly woman didn't immediately respond. Instead, she just stared at Leah with those piercing eyes, studying her as if she were a puzzle to be solved. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "I believe we need to talk," the woman said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "I need to tell you something important." Leah's heart thudded in her chest. "About, what?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "About who I really am." Leah felt a shiver run down her spine. "I'm not sure You're not who you think you are either," the woman interrupted, her voice sharp now. "But you will be." Leah blinked, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" The woman took a step closer, her voice lowering, as if she were about to share a secret. "The truth about your father will come to light soon enough. The truth about everything." Leah's mind reeled. What was this woman talking about? Her father? She hadn't seen her father in years. He had been gone from her life ever since she was a child, and Leah had no intention of ever finding him again. The memories of him were too painful, too filled with abandonment and confusion. But now, hearing this woman speak about him, about the truth, felt like a shock to her very core. "I don't know who you are, or what you think you know," Leah said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound confident. But I'm not interested in whatever game you're playing. The woman's expression softened for a moment, and she sighed deeply. You don't understand yet, she said, almost pityingly. But you will. Soon. Leah stood frozen in place, her thoughts swirling. She had to leave, had to get out of the restaurant. This was all too much, too strange. But the woman wasn't done yet. Don't forget what I said, the elderly woman added before turning and walking toward the door. Leah watched her leave, her mind racing. The woman's words had made no sense, but they had struck a chord deep inside her. She quickly grabbed her things and rushed out the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to clear her head, to make sense of everything that had happened tonight. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Mr. Donovan approaching, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. You've been speaking to her, haven't you? He asked, his voice quiet but intense. Leah's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea how he had known, but there was no denying it now. She nodded reluctantly, feeling the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. You don't know what you've just gotten yourself into, he said darkly. Stay away from her. Do you hear me? Leah swallowed hard. Why? Who is she? Mr. Donovan hesitated, then finally spoke in a low voice. You don't want to know. Trust me. She's not someone you should be messing with. Leah felt a chill run down her spine as Mr. Donovan walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dim light of the parking lot, the mystery deepening with every passing moment. Part 3, The Hidden Truth. Leah couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the images of the elderly woman and Mr. Donovan's warning resurfaced in her mind. She tossed and turned in her bed, trying to push the thoughts away, but they lingered like shadows, stretching out into the corners of her mind. Who was that woman? What did she know? And why had she suddenly appeared in Leah's life? She couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in the span of just a few hours. She had gone from a simple waitress, focused on her work, to someone caught up in a mystery that was far deeper and more complicated than she could have ever imagined. As dawn broke, the first light of day filtered through her curtains, and Leah reluctantly got out of bed. Her head was pounding, the result of too little sleep and too many unanswered questions. She stood in front of her mirror, running a hand through her tangled hair. The reflection staring back at her seemed almost unfamiliar, as if the woman in the mirror didn't fully understand who she was anymore. She knew she needed answers. The restaurant was her refuge, the one place where things felt somewhat normal, even if it meant enduring Mr. Donovan's constant scrutiny. She had a shift in a few hours, and she hoped that getting back to work would provide some sense of normalcy. But even as she got dressed and prepared for the day, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. Something was coming. Something big. Her phone buzzed as she was tying her shoes, and she picked it up with a sigh, hoping it was a distraction from her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from her friend, Sam. Sam, you coming in today? Donovan's looking for you. Don't make him wait. Leah rolled her eyes. Of course, Mr. Donovan was looking for her. She knew he would be keeping an eye on her. It wasn't that he cared about her well-being, he was probably just watching for any mistakes. Leah, I'm on my way. Don't worry about me. As she sent the message, another thought flashed in her mind. What if Sam knew something about the elderly woman? Sam worked at the restaurant too, and although they didn't hang out outside of work, they were friendly. Maybe Sam had seen something that could help her understand what was going on. Leah grabbed her purse and left her apartment, locking the door behind her. The cool morning air hit her face as she stepped outside, and she inhaled deeply, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her head. The walk to the Bellamy was short, but every step felt heavier than the last. Her mind was still reeling from the previous night's events. The woman's cryptic words, Mr. Donovan's cold warning, and the strange connection she felt between them, it was all too much. As she reached the restaurant, she noticed something strange. The front door, which was usually propped open during business hours, was locked. Leah frowned. It wasn't like Mr. Donovan to be late to open up. She knocked on the door, wondering if perhaps he was running behind. A few moments later, the door swung open, revealing Sam standing in the entrance, looking more serious than Leah had ever seen her. "Hey, Sam," Leah greeted, trying to hide her unease. "What's up? I thought you'd be getting things ready inside." Sam stepped aside to let Leah in, her expression unusually grim. "Leah, we need to talk." Leah's heart skipped a beat. Sam wasn't one to act like this. She had always been the one to crack jokes and lighten the mood, especially on stressful days. This wasn't like her at all. "What's going on?" Leah asked, her voice tense. Sam looked around nervously before speaking, as if she was afraid someone might overhear. "You've got to stay away from her," Sam said quietly, her eyes darting toward the back of the restaurant, as though checking for anyone who might be listening. "The woman you spoke to last night. She's not who you think she is." Leah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is she?" Sam took a deep breath, clearly weighing her words carefully. "I don't know all the details," she said, lowering her voice even further, "but I've heard things. Bad things. And you don't want to get tangled up with her." Leah's mind raced. She had to know more. "What kind of things?" Sam looked around again before responding. "The woman, she's dangerous. There's a reason Mr. Donovan wants you to stay away from her. A big one. She's not just some random customer. She's tied to things we shouldn't even be talking about. I've heard rumors about her over the years, and trust me, people who get too close to her end up regretting it." Leah's head was spinning. She had no idea who this woman was, but Sam's words made her blood run cold. Dangerous? Tied to things they shouldn't be talking about? What was going on? Before Leah could respond, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned, and Mr. Donovan appeared, his expression as cold and unreadable as ever. "Leah," he said, his voice sharp. "I need to speak with you. Now." Leah felt a knot form in her stomach. She exchanged a glance with Sam, who gave her a silent warning before retreating toward the kitchen. Leah followed Mr. Donovan into the back office, her mind still reeling from Sam's cryptic warning. Once they were inside, Mr. Donovan closed the door behind them and gestured for Leah to sit. His sharp eyes studied her, and Leah couldn't shake the feeling that he was scrutinizing her every move. "I've been hearing things," he began, his tone low. "And I don't like it. You've been talking to someone you shouldn't be." Leah tried to steady her breathing. "I don't know what you mean." "I'm talking about that woman," he said, his eyes narrowing. "The one who came in last night. She's dangerous, Leah. I've told you to stay away from her, and you need to listen to me. It's for your own good." Leah felt a chill creep up her spine. "Why? Who is she? What does she want?" Mr. Donovan hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "She's not someone you want to get involved with," he said finally, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Her family has a long history with this restaurant. And I'm not talking about any kind of good history." Leah leaned forward. "What do you mean? What history?" Mr. Donovan ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "Look, I don't want to get into the details. But trust me when I say this, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Stay away from her. Don't talk to her again. Do you understand?" Leah's mind was racing. She could feel the weight of his warning, but the questions only piled up. Who was this woman? Why was Mr. Donovan so terrified of her? And why was he so determined to keep her away from Leah? I understand, Leah said finally, though she didn't feel like she did. Something didn't add up. There was more to this story, and Leah was determined to uncover it. As she left the office, the weight of the conversation hung heavily on her shoulders. She needed answers. And she needed them now. Leah spent the rest of the day at work with her thoughts constantly drifting back to the woman and Mr. Donovan's warning. Her mind was consumed by questions she didn't know how to answer, and the need to solve this mystery grew stronger with each passing moment. That evening, she couldn't wait for her shift to end. She needed to speak to Sam again, to press her for more information, but she also knew that time was running out. She could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. As she finally clocked out and made her way toward the door, she looked over her shoulder one last time. She half expected to see Mr. Donovan watching her from the back office, but there was no sign of him. It felt like she had just stepped into a deeper web of intrigue, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. She didn't know it yet, but the mystery was just beginning to unfold. Leah didn't sleep much that night. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. What did she really know about this woman, and why did Mr. Donovan seem so terrified of her? Every moment of the previous night replayed in her mind, the woman's calm but haunting words, Mr. Donovan's frantic warning, and the strange pull she had felt when she spoke with the elderly stranger. It all seemed to fit together somehow, but the pieces were still too scattered to form a clear picture. When she got to the restaurant the next day, it felt different. Not in an obvious way, nothing had changed in the physical sense, but there was a palpable tension hanging in the air. The usual bustle of the morning shift seemed muted, and even the clattering of plates and the soft hum of kitchen activity didn't seem to fill the space the way it normally did. Leah immediately noticed Sam wasn't there. She'd gotten used to working with Sam during their shifts, sharing the workload, and even talking about the customers and how things had gone that day. But today, Sam's absence only deepened the unease that had been building in her chest. Mr. Donovan was in his office as usual, though his door was slightly ajar. Leah hesitated, wondering if she should speak with him again. But she knew better. He hadn't exactly been forthcoming before, and every time she tried to ask questions, it was like hitting a brick wall. She had to find another way to get answers. She went about her usual routine, setting tables and preparing for the lunchtime rush, but her mind was elsewhere. The woman. Mr. Donovan. The strange warning. It all gnawed at her thoughts, like a riddle she couldn't solve. After an hour or so, as she was wiping down one of the tables near the window, the door to the restaurant swung open. Leah looked up, her heart skipping a beat. It was her again. The elderly woman. This time, she wasn't wearing the same coat as before. She had on a faded shawl, her hair now completely silver, and her frail hands trembled slightly as she held onto her cane. But despite her frailty, there was something unsettlingly powerful in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that radiated off her. Leah froze. She had tried to avoid this moment, but there was no escaping it now. She had to confront the truth. The woman spotted her immediately. Her eyes locked onto Leah's, and for a brief moment, Leah swore she could see recognition in those eyes. As if she knew Leah better than Leah knew herself. The woman walked toward her, slow but deliberate, and Leah found herself unable to move. It was as though she was caught in a trance. "Leah," the woman said softly. Her voice was different this time, less cryptic, but still filled with that same weight. "We need to talk." Leah swallowed hard. "I don't think there's anything left to say," she replied, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound confident. "Mr. Donovan." "Mr. Donovan doesn't know everything," the woman interrupted. "But I do." Leah's stomach twisted. This wasn't how she had imagined this confrontation would go. The woman wasn't threatening her, she was, speaking in riddles again. "I don't understand," Leah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it you want from me?" The elderly woman's gaze softened. "I don't want anything from you, Leah. I'm here to help you." Leah narrowed her eyes. "Help me with what?" The woman looked around the restaurant, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. When she seemed satisfied, she leaned in slightly and spoke in a low voice. "There's a lot more going on here than you realize. About the restaurant, about Mr. Donovan, about your family. And I can help you uncover the truth." Leah's heart raced. "My family? What does this have to do with my family?" The woman's eyes flashed with something, fear, regret, perhaps even guilt. But before she could answer, the door to the restaurant opened again, and this time it was Mr. Donovan. He looked between the two of them, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed anger. His face was pale, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. "I thought I told you to leave," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You're not welcome here." Leah stood frozen between the two of them, caught in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. "I'm not going anywhere until she knows the truth," the elderly woman said firmly, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. Mr. Donovan's eyes flicked toward Leah, and in that moment, Leah could see the fear in his gaze. It wasn't just anger, there was genuine fear. "Leah," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "You don't want to get involved with her. You don't know what you're dealing with." The woman smiled bitterly. "You think you can protect her from the truth, Donovan? From her own past? You've done enough hiding already." Leah's mind was spinning. What was going on? What was this woman talking about? And why was Mr. Donovan so terrified? "I don't know what's going on," Leah said, her voice trembling. "But I need answers. I need to know who you are, and why you're here." The woman looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're stronger than you know, Leah. And you're not as alone as you think." She turned to leave, but not before locking eyes with Leah one last time. "We'll talk soon. I promise." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the street outside. Leah stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. Her mind was racing, and every part of her wanted to chase after the woman and demand answers. But she couldn't. Not with Mr. Donovan standing there, watching her like a hawk. "Leah," he said again, his voice low and urgent. "You have to stay away from her. Please." Leah turned to face him, her mind made up. "No. I need to know the truth. And I'm not going to stop until I get it." Mr. Donovan's face tightened with frustration. "You don't understand. If you keep digging into this, you'll regret it. There are things you're better off not knowing." Leah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her as she looked him in the eye. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I don't understand. But I'm going to." And with that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her mind set on uncovering whatever secret lay buried in her past. The woman's words echoed in her ears. The truth. The truth about her family, about Mr. Donovan, and about everything she thought she knew. Leah had crossed a line now, and there was no going back. As Leah left the restaurant, her heart pounded in her chest, but there was something else, something like a spark of hope that lit up the darkness inside her. She had never been the type to back down from a challenge, and this was the biggest one of her life. She needed to find out who this woman was, and what she knew about Leah's family. It was clear that this wasn't just some random stranger. This woman had been waiting for the right time to reveal herself to Leah, and now that time had come. Leah walked through the quiet streets, her footsteps echoing in the empty night. The world seemed still, but she knew that something huge was unfolding. And she was at the center of it, cliffhanger, Leah's determination to uncover the truth about her family, Mr. Donovan, and the mysterious elderly woman has set her on a dangerous path. With every step, she uncovers more questions than answers, and the consequences of her pursuit are starting to weigh heavily on her. Will she uncover the truth, or will it destroy everything she thought she knew? The answers are closer than ever, but so is the danger. The night air felt cold against Leah's skin as she walked down the dimly lit street. The woman's words echoed in her mind, "You're not as alone as you think." Every step Leah took felt like one closer to an unraveling truth, yet it was a truth that seemed to slip further away with every question that arose. Leah's heart was pounding in her chest, but it wasn't just fear. It was a mix of emotions, frustration, curiosity, and a deep, unsettling sense that she was caught in something far bigger than she ever could have imagined. The streetlights above cast long shadows, and the quiet of the night seemed oppressive. Leah kept walking, unsure of where she was heading. The woman had disappeared into the night so quickly, as if she had never been there at all. But Leah knew better. The encounter had been real, and the mystery it left behind was very real, too. She stopped outside her apartment building, gazing up at the windows, her thoughts swirling. There was no way she could rest until she got to the bottom of this. It felt like every part of her life had been turned upside down in the span of a few days. The woman, Mr. Donovan, the cryptic messages, it all pointed to something that seemed to have its roots buried in her past. But why hadn't she known any of this before? Why hadn't anyone told her? She had to know more. But where to start? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Leah tossed and turned, the quiet darkness of her room offering no relief from the storm of questions raging in her mind. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, when the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, Leah got up and grabbed her phone. She couldn't keep running from this, she had to face it head-on. Her fingers hesitated for a moment as she scrolled through her contacts. Sam. Sam had to know something. If anyone could help, it would be her. Leah hit send and typed a simple message, "I need to talk. Meet me in the usual spot." Within minutes, Sam's reply came back, "I'm on my way." Leah dressed quickly, her mind racing. If Sam knew more about the mysterious woman, it could mean everything. It was the key to everything she didn't understand. The usual spot was a small coffee shop a few blocks from the restaurant, a place where they would often unwind after long shifts. Leah arrived first, her eyes scanning the room as she took a seat by the window. The warm light of the morning sun filtered through, but the peace of the moment didn't reach her. Not today. Moments later, Sam walked in, looking even more serious than the last time Leah had seen her. Her usual bright energy was absent. There was a nervousness in her step, an urgency that hadn't been there before. Leah stood up to greet her, but Sam immediately sat down and looked at her with a grave expression. "Leah, what's going on?" Sam asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been acting strange, and I know you've seen her." Leah took a deep breath, unsure of where to begin. "I saw her again," Leah said, keeping her voice low. "The woman. The one from the restaurant. She came in again today, and she said something that made me think she knows more about me than she's letting on." Sam's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. "She's been asking about you," Sam said softly, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Not just at the restaurant, but outside of it. A few weeks ago, I saw her talking to Mr. Donovan, and I heard things." Leah's stomach dropped. "What things?" Sam hesitated, clearly struggling with her words. "I've heard rumors about Mr. Donovan's past. About his family. And, about your family, Leah." Leah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? My family?" Sam lowered her voice even further. "There are whispers. About something that happened years ago. Something big, something dangerous." The kind of thing that people like Mr. Donovan try to bury. But this woman, she's been asking questions about you, Leah. About your mother. Leah's mind reeled. Her mother. She didn't know much about her mother's past. She had died when Leah was young, and all she had left were the faint memories of a woman who had once been warm and loving. But to think there was something dangerous in her past, something hidden, was unimaginable. What does Mr. Donovan have to do with this? Leah asked, her voice trembling. What's he hiding? Sam shook her head. I don't know everything. But I think the woman is tied to him somehow. And whatever it is, it's tied to your family too. I can't explain it all, Leah, but you need to be careful. Mr. Donovan, he's not just some restaurant owner. He's part of something bigger. And I'm afraid it's already too late for you to walk away from it. Leah felt a cold rush of fear wash over her. It wasn't just her own life at risk anymore. It was everything she had ever known, her past, her family, everything, suddenly felt like it was in danger. How could she have not known about any of this? I need to talk to her again, Leah said quietly, determination flooding her veins. I have to find out what's going on. Sam grabbed Leah's arm, her eyes wide with worry. Leah, don't. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This isn't just some misunderstanding. There are forces at play here that you can't fight on your own. You need to walk away before it's too late. But Leah was resolute. I can't, Sam. I can't walk away from this. I need to know what happened to my family. I need to understand why all of this is connected. I can't just sit here in the dark anymore. Sam let out a frustrated sigh, but she knew she couldn't stop Leah. Then be careful. Watch your back. Leah nodded. I will. After they finished their coffee, Leah parted ways with Sam and made her way back to the restaurant, her mind set on finding the answers she so desperately sought. But as she stepped inside, the feeling of unease was immediate. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for a few regulars who were deep in conversation. Mr. Donovan's office door was slightly ajar, but there was no sign of him. Leah moved quietly through the dining area, her eyes darting from corner to corner. She needed to find a way to speak to the elderly woman again, and soon. Every moment she wasted felt like a moment closer to something she couldn't control. It wasn't long before the bell above the door jingled, and Leah's breath caught in her throat. The woman was back. She walked in as if she had all the time in the world, her gaze scanning the restaurant before landing on Leah. There was something different in her eyes this time, something urgent. I knew you'd come back, the woman said, her voice steady and calm. Leah's heart raced. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand everything. Please. The woman sighed, her eyes softening. I never wanted to drag you into this, Leah. But now that you're here, you have no choice but to follow the thread. You're already tangled up in it. Leah's voice shook, but she pressed on. Tell me what happened. Tell me about my family. About Mr. Donovan. Please. The woman looked around before speaking again, her voice a mere whisper. There's a dark truth about your family, Leah. A truth that Mr. Donovan and others have spent years trying to bury. But the past is never really gone, it always finds a way back. Leah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Your mother, the woman said, her voice heavy with emotion, wasn't just anyone. She was involved in something far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. And you, well, you're the key to unraveling it all. Leah felt a chill creep down her spine. She had always known there were pieces of her mother's life she would never understand. But this? This was more than she had ever expected. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out an old, worn photograph. She handed it to Leah, and as Leah took it, her hands trembled. It was a picture of a woman who looked strikingly familiar, her mother, but younger. And standing next to her was a man she'd never seen before. His eyes were cold, calculating. And behind them both was a large, imposing building. It looked like the kind of place one would find deep in the woods, far away from any city or town. "This is where it all started," the woman said softly. "And this is where it will all end." Leah's mind raced as she stared at the photo. Her mother, a part of something dark and hidden. And Mr. Donovan, he knew about it. He had to. Everything was beginning to fall into place, but the truth was even darker than Leah had ever imagined. The truth about Leah's family and Mr. Donovan's involvement in a dangerous, hidden past is slowly coming to light. But with each new revelation, Leah is drawn deeper into a web of secrets, lies, and shadows that she may never escape from. Leah's hands trembled as she held the old photograph in her hands. The woman beside her, so strangely familiar and unsettling, watched her with steady eyes. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken since she handed over the picture, but her presence loomed large, filling the space with a heavy tension. The image before Leah seemed frozen in time, her mother, younger, her face soft with the innocence of youth. And the man beside her, there was something cold about him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, didn't belong to someone she'd ever imagined in her mother's life. The building behind them only added to the mystery, an ominous structure she'd never seen before. Leah's mind spun with questions, each one more pressing than the last. Who was this man? What was this place? What did all of this have to do with her? She looked up at the elderly woman, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is he? Why does he look like he belongs in some kind of dark story? The woman's expression softened. That's your grandfather, Leah. But not the one you've been told about. Your true grandfather. Leah froze. Her true grandfather? She had always known about the man her mother had mentioned in passing, an old, distant relative who had passed away before Leah was born. This man, however, was a stranger, his presence more menacing than any family member she had ever imagined. Her voice caught in her throat as she processed the words. My grandfather? The woman nodded gravely. Yes. His name is Victor Blackwood. And his legacy is a dark one, Leah. One that your mother tried to escape from. Leah's heart pounded. Victor Blackwood. The name sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had never heard it before, but the weight it carried made her feel as though it had been buried deep in her bones all along. Your mother tried to protect you from the truth. She thought that by severing ties with him, she could shield you from the consequences of his past, the woman continued. But some truths can't be outrun. And the past has a way of catching up. Leah's mind raced. How could her mother have kept something like this a secret? She had always believed her family to be ordinary. Her mother had always been loving, kind, and protective. The idea that her mother had been connected to such a dangerous man felt like a betrayal. But Leah wasn't sure if she could trust everything the woman said. What if she was being manipulated? Why are you telling me this? Leah asked, her voice trembling but resolute. What do you want from me? The woman's eyes softened, almost pitying. I don't want anything from you, Leah. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you this. The time has come. Leah stared at her, trying to read the woman's face. There was something behind her eyes, something genuine, but also something that made Leah uneasy. You said the past is coming back. What does that mean? The woman sighed. Your grandfather wasn't just a man with power and wealth. He was involved in things far darker than you could imagine. Criminal enterprises, dangerous liaisons, and a network of people who would do anything to protect what he built. And your mother, for all her efforts to keep you away from it, is tied to it in ways you don't yet understand. Leah's pulse quickened. What do you mean? What does that have to do with me? Everything, the woman said softly. It has everything to do with you. Leah stood up suddenly, the photo still clutched in her hands, her chest tight. Her mother had been connected to this dangerous man. And she, Leah, was now caught in the web of it all. But why? The woman seemed to understand Leah's inner turmoil. I know this is hard to process, but the truth is out there, Leah. You need to understand what happened. Your life, it's been shaped by forces beyond your control, and now you have to take charge. You have to know the truth before it consumes you. Leah's mind was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, fear, and an odd sense of determination that seemed to rise in her chest. She needed to find out more. She couldn't let her mother's past define her future. I can't just walk away from this, Leah said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. I need to know everything. I have to understand what's going on. Who can I trust? Where do I start? The woman looked at her with a somber expression. Trust your instincts, Leah. The truth is out there, but it's not easy to find. You'll need to dig deep, beyond what's visible, beyond the surface of everything you think you know. Look at the people around you. They may hold the key. Leah stared at her, searching her face for any hint of a lie, but found none. And Mr. Donovan, she asked. How does he fit into all of this? The woman's lips tightened. He's more involved than he's willing to admit. Mr. Donovan, he's not just a restaurant owner. He's a protector of sorts, someone who's tied to your family's history. He's been watching over you for years, making sure that certain things remain hidden. But those things, they're starting to surface. And when they do, everything will change. Leah's mind was spinning. Mr. Donovan knew something. He had to. He'd always been too cautious around her, too protective. But what exactly was he hiding? I need to speak with him, Leah said, her voice resolute. I need answers from him. The woman placed a hand on Leah's arm, her grip firm yet comforting. Be careful. Mr. Donovan may not tell you the truth. He's a man of secrets, and his loyalty lies with forces that are far more dangerous than you realize. Leah nodded, feeling the weight of the woman's warning settle into her bones. She had to confront Mr. Donovan, but she knew now that she was walking into a storm. Nothing would be the same after this. The restaurant was quiet when Leah arrived later that evening. The usual hum of activity was replaced by an unsettling stillness. It was as if the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Leah walked in cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. The staff was moving in and out of the kitchen, but none of them seemed to notice her arrival. She headed straight for Mr. Donovan's office, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached for the door, she hesitated for a moment. The weight of the woman's words echoed in her mind. He's a man of secrets. Could she really trust him? With a deep breath, Leah opened the door. Mr. Donovan sat behind his desk, his back to her as he stared out the window. He turned at the sound of the door opening, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stood there, each waiting for the other to speak. What do you want, Leah? He asked, his voice low and measured. Why are you here? Leah took a step forward, her mind made up. I need answers, Mr. Donovan. And you're the only one who can give them to me. Mr. Donovan's face hardened. I told you before, Leah. You don't want to get involved in this. There's more at stake than you realize. I don't care, Leah said firmly, her voice unwavering. I need to know the truth. About my mother. About my family. About you. The tension in the room thickened, and for a moment, Leah thought he might refuse. But then, his expression softened, and he let out a long sigh. I didn't want you to find out this way, he said quietly, his voice almost resigned. But now that you have, I can't stop you. Just know this, Leah, once you start asking questions, there's no turning back. And the truth you seek might be more dangerous than you think. Leah's chest tightened, but she held her ground. I'm ready. The confrontation with Mr. Donovan has begun. Leah is closer than ever to the truth, but every revelation she uncovers pulls her deeper into a dangerous web of lies, secrets, and betrayal. Will she be able to handle the truth, or will it consume her? The next step in her journey is a dangerous one, and there's no telling where it will lead. Leah sat in the dimly lit office, the tension between her and Mr. Donovan thick enough to cut with a knife. Her mind raced, each question she asked only pulling her deeper into the web of deceit that she had stumbled into. It was clear now, there was no easy way out. She had crossed a threshold, and with every moment, she felt more like a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before she even understood the rules. Tell me, Leah said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. What did my mother get involved in? What was so dangerous about Victor Blackwood? Mr. Donovan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him as if contemplating whether he should tell her the truth or hold back. The air between them was thick, heavy with the weight of years of secrets. He finally spoke, his voice low and careful. Your mother wasn't just trying to protect you from your grandfather, Leah, he began, his eyes never leaving hers. She was trying to protect you from everything that came with him. The power he wielded, it wasn't just in business. It was in people. His connections ran deep, deeper than you could ever imagine. Leah felt a chill crawl down her spine. His connections ran deep. The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. She had always known her mother to be fiercely independent, determined to keep her away from anything that might taint their family's name. So why hadn't she told Leah the full truth? I don't understand, Leah said, frustration creeping into her voice. What do you mean by his connections? And what does that have to do with me? Mr. Donovan's gaze softened, almost pitying. Your grandfather was a man who dealt in more than just wealth. He had ties to people who controlled entire industries, criminal enterprises, political power, the kind of influence that could bend the world to his will. He was ruthless, Leah. A man who would stop at nothing to protect what he built. And your mother, she was part of that world, even if she tried to walk away. Leah felt her heart race. Ruthless? Criminal enterprises? This was not the man she had imagined as her grandfather. This was someone from the pages of a dark history, a figure shrouded in mystery and fear. But what did all of this have to do with her? Why did she leave? Leah asked, the words almost slipping from her lips before she realized they had been on her mind for so long. Why would she turn her back on all of that? Mr. Donovan's eyes darkened, his expression hardening. Because she couldn't protect you from it anymore. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. She thought by severing ties with him, she could shield you from that world. But some connections don't just disappear. They follow you, haunt you. Leah's mind spun, struggling to make sense of it all. Her mother had been part of this world, part of a family of criminals and power brokers, trying to protect her from something far worse. But why didn't she tell Leah? Why had she kept all of this a secret? You're telling me my mother was involved in some sort of cartel? Or syndicate? Leah's voice shook with disbelief. Mr. Donovan shook his head slowly. It wasn't just one thing. It was a web, a network of individuals who controlled everything from the shadows. Your mother got involved when she was young, and she was in too deep. But she didn't want that life for you, Leah. She wanted you to be free. She fought to distance herself from it, but there were always strings attached. Always eyes watching. Leah felt the ground beneath her shift. Her whole life, her mother had tried to shield her from this, and yet, here she was, caught in the middle of a story she had never known existed. But as much as she wanted to reject it, the pieces were starting to fit. The warnings. The secrets. The odd behavior of the people around her. It was all coming together, and it was all pointing back to one person, Victor Blackwood. "I still don't understand," Leah said, her voice tight with frustration. "How do you know all of this? You've been a part of this from the beginning, haven't you?" Mr. Donovan's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "I've known more about your family than you'll ever realize. But I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to drag you into this. You have no idea what kind of danger you're in right now. The moment you started asking questions, you set something in motion. And now it's too late." Leah's heart skipped a beat. Too late for what? Mr. Donovan stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked toward the window, his back to Leah as he spoke, his voice tense. "There are people who will stop at nothing to protect the legacy your grandfather left behind. People who don't care who they have to hurt to keep things under control. And now that you know the truth, you've become a target." Leah's breath hitched in her throat. "A target? What are you talking about?" He turned to face her, his expression filled with an unspoken warning. "Victor Blackwood's legacy isn't just about wealth, Leah. It's about power. And there are people who will do whatever it takes to keep it in their hands. They've been watching you. Waiting for the right moment to make their move. And now that you know what you know, they'll come after you." Leah felt the blood drain from her face. Her life had just been turned upside down. She had thought she was close to answers, but all she had done was open a door to a far darker world. One she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of everything she had learned. Mr. Donovan stepped forward, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I know you didn't, Leah. But you're in this now. And the only way out is to uncover everything. You have to find out what your mother was hiding. You have to find the truth before it's too late." Leah stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, confusion, anger. And beneath it all, a rising sense of determination. She wasn't going to let this go. She couldn't. Not when so many lives, her mother's, her own, were tangled in this mess. "I won't let them hurt me," Leah said, her voice quiet but fierce. "I won't run from this. I'll find the answers. No matter what it takes." Mr. Donovan's face softened, as if he knew that Leah had made up her mind. "I hope you're ready. You're about to dive deeper into something you can't undo. But you're right about one thing, you're not running. And you won't be alone." Leah's heart pounded in her chest. Alone? She was far from alone now. The question was, who could she trust? Was there anyone in her life who hadn't been involved in this dangerous web? "I have to go," she said suddenly, her resolve hardening. "I have to find out more. About my mother. About Victor Blackwood. About everyone who's been pulling the strings." Mr. Donovan nodded. "Be careful, Leah. And don't trust anyone who offers you help. They may have their own agenda." Leah is now fully immersed in the dangerous world her mother tried to shield her from. She knows she has to uncover the truth, but in doing so, she risks becoming a pawn in a much larger game. The stakes are higher than ever, and the people who want to keep the legacy of Victor Blackwood intact are closing in on her. Will Leah be able to uncover the truth before it consumes her? The next part will reveal more shocking twists as Leah's journey takes a darker turn. Leah's footsteps echoed down the dark corridor, each step heavy with the weight of the past few weeks. She had known this moment would come. The truth had led her here, to this place where everything, every secret, every lie, would finally be revealed. But as she approached the door, her heart raced. Was she ready for this? She had spent days, weeks even, piecing together the scattered fragments of her family's history. Every conversation with Mr. Donovan, every document she had uncovered, every disturbing connection had brought her closer to the truth. But none of it had prepared her for the final confrontation. None of it had prepared her for what she was about to face. The mansion before her was as imposing as she remembered, the cold stone walls and towering windows casting long shadows across the estate. It had once been a symbol of wealth and power, a place where the Blackwood legacy had been built, brick by brick. But now, it felt more like a tomb, filled with the echoes of things long buried. Leah paused for a moment, her hand resting on the door's cold metal handle. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side. Would she find answers, or would she discover that her entire life had been one long deception? With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the world outside. And there, standing in front of her, was the man who had started it all, the man whose name she had feared and whose legacy she had fought to understand. Victor Blackwood. He stood tall, his presence commanding as always. But there was something different about him now. He looked older, worn down by years of secrets and power. His sharp features were softened by time, but the coldness in his eyes remained the same. Leah didn't know whether to be angry, frightened, or relieved. She had imagined this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of numbness. Victor Blackwood spoke first, his voice low and measured. "I wondered when you'd finally find your way here, Leah." Her heart skipped a beat. He knew she would come. But how? "I've been following your progress, of course," he continued, his eyes gleaming with something that felt too knowing. "You've come a long way. Your mother would be proud of your persistence." Leah's chest tightened at the mention of her mother. She had spent so much time searching for answers, for a glimpse of the woman who had been the center of her life. And now, standing before her, was the man who had helped shape the course of her mother's, and her own, fate. "I don't want your praise," Leah snapped, her voice hardening. "I want the truth." Victor raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering across his features. "The truth? Oh, Leah, you've always been so eager for the truth. But I fear you may not like what you find." "I don't care," Leah shot back, stepping forward. "I need to know. Who are you, really? What have you done? What have you done to my mother?" Victor's expression shifted, the amusement fading into something darker. "Your mother, she was always far too idealistic. She thought she could outrun her past. She thought she could escape me, escape the legacy I built. But she was wrong." Leah's breath caught in her throat. "What did you do to her?" Victor took a slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't do anything to her, Leah. Your mother chose her path. She chose to walk away from everything. And that's where things went wrong." Leah felt the ground shift beneath her. "You're saying she chose to leave you? To leave everything behind?" Victor's lips curled into a smirk. "She didn't just leave, Leah. She ran. She ran from the very thing that made her powerful, the very thing that kept her alive. And that's where the mistakes began. You see, when you're part of a world like ours, you can never truly leave it. The connections are too deep. The debt's too high." Leah's head spun as she tried to process his words. Her mother had left him, but not in the way she had imagined. It wasn't just an escape from a bad marriage or a toxic family. It was something much more dangerous. "Why didn't you tell me?" Leah's voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about her?" Victor's eyes softened for a moment, almost as if he were reminiscing about a past long gone. "Your mother didn't want you to know. She didn't want you to carry the burden of the truth. But you found it anyway, didn't you? It's in your blood, Leah. The need to know, the need to uncover the past." Leah's thoughts churned. It was all a lie. Her mother had tried to protect her, to shield her from this world, but it was always there, lurking in the background. And now that she knew the truth, she couldn't just walk away from it. She had to confront it. "What do you want from me, Victor?" Leah asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "What is it that you want?" Victor's gaze locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. "What I want, Leah, is simple. I want you to understand. To understand that the past is never truly gone. That the choices we make echo through generations. And that you, my dear, are the heir to a legacy far greater than you realize." Leah's heart pounded in her chest. An heir? To what? To more power? More danger? Was this what her mother had fought to keep her from? "I don't want any part of this," Leah said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I never asked for this." Victor's lips curved into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't have to want it, Leah. The truth doesn't care about your desires. The past doesn't care about your choices. It is what it is." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with tension. Leah's mind raced, but one thing was clear: Victor Blackwood was not just a relic of the past. He was a man who still had power, still had influence. And now, she was caught in his web. "You've been searching for answers, Leah," Victor said softly. "And now you have them. But what will you do with them? Will you fight to change things, or will you accept your fate?" Leah's hands clenched at her sides. "I'll fight. I won't let you control me. I won't let you control anyone else." Victor chuckled darkly. "Fight all you want, Leah. You'll soon realize that fighting this battle comes with consequences." Leah met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm ready for whatever comes." Leah has finally confronted Victor Blackwood, but the truth is darker and more complex than she could have ever imagined. The legacy of her family, the choices they made, and the dangerous world they were entangled in all seem to point to an inevitable confrontation. But as Victor leaves her with a chilling warning, Leah is forced to decide how far she's willing to go to fight for the truth, and whether she's prepared to face the cost.